Hello and welcome to Two Friends Watch. My name's Daniel and I'm here with my good friend Andrew.
And I'm here in Edinburgh tonight for this podcast, which I hope you're listening to and you enjoy, because this was a rough one for us, I think.
This was bad. Straight off the bat, I'm just throwing this out there. Didn't enjoy this movie.
You didn't?
Not even a little bit.
Oh, man. Yeah, I think this is going to be a tough one to discuss tonight, because this was your choice.
This is my choice, and I picked it, not because I've seen it before, which a lot of us have done. We've picked our movies because they're movies that we've seen and we want to discuss, but I picked this one simply because I know it's quite a strong movie and I've wanted to see it. So I thought I would pick it. Boy, was that a mistake.
Boy, making mistakes is sort of a theme of the evening, I guess.
I mean, this movie just went from one cynical, depressing, heartfelt, miserable moment to the next. Never had a single up. It never had a moment of niceness or pleasantry about it. It was just one punch after another, straight in the gut. It was really bad.
Sternum. Anyway, this is The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas.
Yep. 2008 historical drama film based on a novel by John Boyne.
Yes, and adapted by the BBC, I think it was.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, you can tell because all the Germans have very prim British accents.
That was a little off-putting right at the start when they started talking, and I was just saying to myself, this is exceptionally off-putting for an accent, but I suppose, they didn't worry about it.
There's only so many ways you can handle that, I guess, if you're wanting to make a movie set in a foreign country without just sort of going for broke and actually doing it from start to end in a foreign language. I mean, if they were talking like English with silly German accents, we'd make fun of that too.
That is true.
They can't really win.
So the movie starts off Nazi Germany during the Holocaust, where we have our main character, who is an 8-year-old boy called Bruno,
played by Asa Butterfield, who's recently gained acclaim for films like Hugo and more recently Ender's Game. He's one of the sort of most high-profile child actors of the moment, and I think this film was sort of where he started to get his big break.
I thought I recognised him, and I just couldn't pin it down. But yeah, and now you said the Ender's Game. I see him now. I recognise him.
Yeah, he has those very starey, very bright blue eyes.
Very sunken, hollow eyes.
Yeah, he's very pale and waxy looking.
So we see Bruno playing in... Now, I can't remember where their original hometown was. It was somewhere central.
It's Berlin.
Was it Berlin?
It's Berlin, yeah.
And his father is a soldier, as we are told, and he is, very early on in the movie, promoted to an SS Commandant.
Yes.
Which is quite a high-ranking commander, from what I could gather.
Well, he got put in charge of the main concentration camp in Germany, Auschwitz. So I guess we can assume that he's a fairly high-ranking member of the Nazi brass.
But this interesting thing is, straight away, you get this almost heartfelt sort of scene as Bruno, he's playing with his friends, it's a lovely day, people are enjoying shopping, and it's a nice sort of urban environment.
Yeah, everything looks very clean, and there's this really syrupy John Horner score, and it's all very sort of prettily lit and very deep focus and everything. It's very pastoral almost. It's an odd beginning and kind of off-putting to have this sort of pastoral English-looking setup where we know that it's one of the most sinister and brutally oppressive regimes that's ever blighted the face of the human race. It's kind of dissonant in a way.
So yeah, it is very eerie because you're looking at this idyllic kind of scene, but then scattered around is the swastika and people in these very intimidating uniforms and very Nazi-esque kind of outfits and looks about them.
Yeah, I mean, as I understand it, the original novel was told exclusively from Bruno's point of view, and it's sort of his childhood experience where he looks back on everything with rose-tinted glasses, and everything seems fairly lovely and nice to him, but obviously the more sinister elements of the Nazi regime are obvious to the viewers, or the readers, as would be the case with the novel. But and that's sort of something the film tries to tap into, I guess, because it's not quite as precisely yoked to Bruno's worldview as like a first-person novel. Because we do get cutaway scenes with his parents and his grandparents and so forth, but it does have this very sort of child's innocent idea of the world surrounding them and how he doesn't really have any idea what's going on.
Not really. I mean, we do know about the rest of his family. His father, as previously mentioned, then his mother, Eliza, and his older sister, Gretel. They all live together, and you do see that the older sister, Gretel, she has a much better understanding of what is happening in the world right now. She begins to develop an understanding, and you can see that she really embraces Nazism.
She's the platonic ideal of like Hitler Youth.
Mm-hmm.
She's coming on to this older SS lieutenant chap who hangs around with their family. She's putting up sort of all these Aryan-themed posters on her wall, and it's like this sort of coming-of-age adolescent type who's really getting into the whole nationalist regime and who's really had the brainwashing program of the Nazi education system get to her.
Yeah. So the father, Ralph, the character's name, he gets promoted, and they are moved into the country, very, very close to the concentration camp where he works. Yes. And you can tell early on that there are one or two people in the family that aren't overly keen on the situation. The mother, Eliza,
played by Vera Farmiga, who's really gives probably the best performance in the whole movie, I thought. She's really pretty stunning in this film.
Well, she won British Independent Film Award Best Actress. She won that for this role.
Yeah, because pretty much throughout the film, you can tell all the sort of conflicting emotions in her, where she's wanting to be a good wife and a good mother, but she realizes like pretty much the most ethical thing she could possibly do is just sort of find the nearest Luger and kill as many Nazi scumbags as she possibly can.
Yeah, but she's so conflicted, both for the safety of her children and for her husband's well-being. You get the impression that he is a very hard worker, and he seems to have been going for this position for a long time, as there's a big party when he gets it.
Yeah.
You also learn at this same party that the grandmother, can't remember her name, but she greatly disapproves of this whole situation, and she is warned by the father, by Ralph, not to
air her views in public.
Yes, as it's worded. The grandfather, he seems quite happy with how everything's going on. He doesn't seem too bothered either way. He seems just quite happy that his son is moving up in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of the central driving tension of the film. It's this gradual realization that despite all the sort of cozy comforts of family and home and whatnot, all the luxuries that these sort of children of the high-ranking SS officer are afforded, they're made increasingly uncomfortable by the inhumanity they're seeing going on around them, which is a really sort of fascinating take on the Second World War and sort of the perspective of insiders who are sheltered from all the violence and the horror.
Yeah, I mean, it's the perspective of the innocent during the war, which is never really, mentioned in any other areas, history books or anything like that. It's always, very much the frontline sort of effects, or even, the adults and how it affects socially the adult system. But it never mentions things like the children.
This film, I guess, isn't supposed to be necessarily terribly historically accurate. I mean, if you were going to be raised, because I guess this is taking place in the latter days of the war, I think it's meant to be like 1943, 44 sort of time. Bruno would have lived most of his life under the Nazi regime, so it sort of stands to reason he would have been raised from birth to hate the Jews and sort of love the Fuhrer and whatnot.
That is true.
But at the same time, it sort of works as a fable, I suppose. It's almost like it's sort of like a really dark, perverse fairy story in a way, where it's about this sort of revelation of this sort of dark world that's underpinning all the sort of comfort and luxury and familiarity.
Yeah, that's it's a good description actually of the movie.
Yeah, well, over the course of the movie, I mean, Bruno starts to notice, for instance, I think there is one older Jew he believes they're farmers to begin with. He originally sees the concentration camp out of his bedroom window, and he believes it's a farm. He reckons all the Jews he sees wandering around are farmers. and they treat him very nicely. There's one older Jewish guy who bandages up his knee when he falls off a swing, for instance, and at the same time he's being taught by this tutor chap his dad brings in, that the Jews aren't really people, and they're tearing down the fatherland and they're robbing innocent Germans and what have you. So
I mean, that's quite hard to listen to.
It is.
I mean, the scenes are very short, but during these scenes where you see the teachings that are being bestowed on the children of this basically indoctrination into the way that they think about how the Jewish people were evil, basically the epitome of evil, and how they were destroying Germany and how they've ruined Germany, and Germany has to get rid of them to become great again. And it is immensely awkward. Mainly, I found, and I thought this was a great element of the movie, was that they got the children to read these history books, or these apparently factual books, the school books. And it was the fact that it's children reading these terrible things is what just made it so much more poignant and so much harder to listen to.
Yeah, well, actually, I looked this up, and the book that you see the tutor give them isn't actually a book so much as it is a compilation of fascistic newspapers. It's a compilation of a newspaper tabloid that was published during Nazi Germany, called Der Stürmer, translates to The Attacker in English. The publisher was actually executed for crimes against humanity by the time the war was over, and it was basically just the outlet for the most really vile anti-Semitic stuff that the Nazi Party had to offer, and this is being taught as regular education.
Yeah, they even say at one point that this is what the children are being taught. This is the standard education system now in Germany during this time.
Yeah, I mean, again, well, I dare say there was a lot of that going on in Nazi Germany, but obviously the worst aspects are being highlighted for the sake of the film's story.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's probably taken for an impact effect, but it was still difficult.
Yeah. I mean, one film I watched recently was 12 Years a Slave, which obviously is set during the antebellum South, during slavery days in America. And it's similarly working to expose a sort of system of oppression where just random callous inhumanity is committed against people who are really only arbitrarily separated from the rest of, people. In one case it's blacks, the other it's Jews.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the other film, but I presume they're probably very similar to each other.
In some ways, yeah. But again, it's this sort of innocent, naive perspective that just sort of highlights the kind of communal insanity, I guess, like the self-delusion necessary to convince yourself that these other people aren't really people. It's because Bruno doesn't understand this. He needs to have it drilled into him that this arbitrary, nonsensical distinction.
Exactly, yeah. And you could see that they do, at several points throughout the movie, very strongly trying to drill this into him, and he just doesn't seem to understand, mainly because the family servant, Pavel, which is the Jewish man you are introduced to early on, he's a very nice man, and Bruno and Pavel have, conversations, short conversations, because you get the impression that Pavel is not allowed to speak to anybody unless spoken to. And when Bruno does eventually go to the, quotation marks, farm, he finds a young boy there, his own age, called Shmuel.
Shmuel, yeah. And they just sort of sit on opposite sides of an electric fence, and they just sort of get to talking.
Yeah, they just chat and, play board games through the electric fence. And you could see that this is very effectively and rapidly undoing or preventing all this poison being poured into poor Bruno's ear. And it just seems to be stopping him from basically being indoctrinated, which, when you get to the end of this film, you end up thinking, would it have been better for him to have become indoctrinated?
Well, we'll get to that in the end, because obviously the ending of this film hinges on a fairly significant spoiler. Well, an entirely significant spoiler that really pretty much makes or breaks your perception of the film.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we'll get to that in time, but what sort of stood out to me about this film is it plays almost like a horror film in some ways. It plays like the sort of old school haunted house narrative where a family moves into a new home and they just sort of gradually, through the eyes of the most innocent member of the cast, come to realize that something is really horribly wrong with this place. Except it's not ghosts or zombies or anything like that. It's not an ancient Indian burial ground. It's their complicity in genocide.
Which I think is much worse, because it's a lot more tangible, realistic, and close to home.
Yeah, in a way.
At least with ghosts and demons and Indian burial grounds, raising the dead, you can at least distance yourself from that, because you have a grounding in reality, knowing that these sort of things aren't around. Whereas this could really be a real thing. And I did actually at one point in the movie have to pause it and look up, is this based on any sort of, true story, or even, the framework of a true story. But the writer has said that this is entirely a fictional story. But it is written and portrayed in the movie so well and so realistically that you do find yourself genuinely believing that this happened.
Well, it does have a great deal of production value to it, and it's all very, very well shot with all the sort of period detail intact. I suppose this is actually the third period film we've actually done out of the 4 episodes we've done so far, so...
Yeah, I never realised that.
Yeah, we'll need to find a film that doesn't have, well-done period details so we can actually have a point of reference for that. But, the period details are very convincing. I think that I actually saw a bit of trivia on IMDb, which said that apparently the mother wears her wedding ring on her right hand, which is a particular detail of Nazi Germany.
Oh, right. Very interesting. Probably my biggest complaint before we move on to perhaps the spoiler part of the evening is I understand that Bruno is meant to be the epitome of innocence. He is meant to be the innocent eyes that can't understand this horrendous situation that's going on around him. But I do find that it may be a little overplayed. For example, earlier on in the movie, Pavel, very early on that he is being portrayed as the innocent that's going to be something horrible's going to happen to him, and it's going to bring this message home to the audience. And of course, something horrible does happen to him. And although Bruno doesn't directly witness it, basically Pavel gets dragged off and beaten and beaten and beaten and beaten.
Yes.
And then the next scene is the cleaner scrubbing the floor, and it's very obviously she's scrubbing the blood off the floor. Now, a little while later, Bruno says, I wonder when Pavel is coming back. And I know he's meant to be the innocent character, but this isn't just one time he says something a little too stupid. He just, every time, it just gets more and more obvious what's going on around him. His innocence becomes more and more
difficult to relate to. Exactly.
It's difficult to believe. He just becomes like a weird sadistic joke where all the way through up till pretty much the end he still refers to it as the farm, even though people have pretty much outright told him now what it is. And it's like, you're not that stupid. 8 years old is a young and innocent age. And I'll admit, when I was 8 years old, I had no idea what was going on in the political world at that time. But I understood the concept of death.
Yeah, exactly.
Everyone does at a very young age. Far younger than 8 years old, they learn and understand the concept of death. So it's like Bruno is almost a caricature of what he should be towards the end, because he can't seem to wrap his mind around it, or his character just never seems to understand. And it does make the movie a little silly towards the end for that reason alone. And that is probably my biggest complaint about the film.
And we'll get to why in a moment, but I seem to remember that apparently in the original book, he actually didn't know who Hitler was. And that sort of naivete does carry over into the film, because, it's like this stuff it just glances off him. It's weird. But I think to sort of continue discussing this in any meaningful way, we need to start getting into the spoiler section of the film.
We do. So before we get there, Andrew, just last final thoughts on the movie. Would you recommend this to somebody? Would you watch it again?
Well, I'm kind of torn, I have to admit, because on the one hand, there are a lot of really well-acted set pieces in this film. There's a lot of really quite neat, quite insightful, I thought, scenes that sort of highlight the inhumanity and the callousness of this regime. Scenes like the moment with Pavel, scenes like the ones where Bruno and Shmuel are sitting across from each other and next to the electric fence. And a lot of that stuff really does work. A lot of it does set you to thinking. But then we get to the ending. And like I say, the ending is either the bit that makes it or breaks it for you, and it broke it for me.
It did. It ruined it for me. So, on that note, this is the official spoiler warning. You want to end it here, watch the movie, you'll be unpleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and this is probably the heaviest spoiler warning, because this really does significantly impact your appreciation of the film one way or the other.
Oh, absolutely. This ending completes the movie, both in a good way and a bad way.
Yeah, it changes everything, so seriously, spoiler warning, if you don't want to be spoiled, just stop now, okay? You have been warned.
At this point, Bruno has made friends with Small. They've gotten to know each other a bit better. But you can see that the strain is taking its toll on the mother. They start to have more arguments, things start getting out of hand, and the father, he insists that they stay here, that it's not as bad as she thinks, that the children are, being taught at home and everything's okay. But eventually, little things happen. Palvo gets beaten up quite badly. The SS lieutenant, he disappears because they found out that his father was a coward, so he heads to the front line. Wink, wink.
A defector, more like.
Yeah.
Which is, coward according to a certain regime that shall not be named.
Exactly. Yeah. And then there's the scene where Schmoll, he is cleaning the glasses. And this is almost a good moment in the movie, because he's out of that terrible camp. And the more time you're out of that camp, the less time that something bad's going to happen to you in that camp. So he's out of the camp, and you're thinking, brilliant, he's at the camp. If he just keeps his head down and knuckles down, everything, it might blow over for him. But no, very, very early on in that scene, Bruno offers him food. He takes the food, he starts eating it right as the lieutenant walks in. Now, the lieutenant is an intimidating man. He is a scary man, and the 8-year-old Bruno is terrified of him. So when the lieutenant shouts at Bruno, did you give him this food? Bruno lies and said, no, Schmoll stole it. And then next time you see Schmoll, and I by the way, at this point I was sure Schmoll was dead. And that is reinforced by the fact for the next few scenes, Bruno keeps returning back to the fence and his friend's gone. He's not there. And I got so frustrated, because it's like, you just killed your friend. You might not have meant it, but your stupidity and ignorance to this situation is so dumbfounding and irritating that you don't seem to realise what you've just done to your friend. But luckily, thank God, Schmoll isn't killed. He is, however, heavily beaten.
Yeah, he has a massive and surprisingly gruesome prosthetic above his right eye, where he's been obviously beaten around the head. It looks like something out of Breaking Bad. It's not very pleasant to look at on an 8-year-old boy. No,
that I have to admit, that was very disturbing to look at. But Bruno apologises, and Schmoll forgives him. And it's around this point, or soon afterwards, that you found out that the grandmother has been killed in a bombing. Now, Andrew, I need to ask you, do you believe that?
Well, it did kind of ring a bit false to me, because we see her funeral, we see the whole funeral procession, and nothing about the surroundings suggests a city under siege. Nothing suggests that obviously there were Allied bombings going on with places like Dresden in the Second World War, but we never really see any of the sort of collateral damage.
No, and remember, the grandmother was perhaps the most outspoken character against the fascist regime. And there was a scene earlier, a very small scene, where she was meant to come and see the children, but she refused to come up because she was so against the situation. And then, not long after, she dies in an unfortunate bombing, which, keep in mind again, both of them, the grandmother and the grandfather, are very old people. Now, if they're building, or they were likely to be together, that's just an assumption, but they were bombed, he is just as likely to die as she is.
Yeah.
But he seems fine. You see him much later and he doesn't seem that injured at all. Now, again, it could just be that perhaps she went out to the shops and a bomb landed and it killed her and he wasn't there. But I just thought, again, it was just that little air of uncertainty that she was the only one to just be killed off screen. One of the main characters to be killed off screen.
Yeah, I've got to admit I feel bad because I didn't really register the ambiguity there, but I think you're right. I think there is definitely something at work in that scene.
Yeah, and I thought it was actually perhaps one of the most brilliantly subtle moments of the movie, because this movie, by the way, pretty much from start to finish, is anything but subtle.
Yeah, pretty much exactly that. And, well, that's sort of where it gets up tough towards the ending, because Bruno and Shmuel get to talking, and Shmuel lets Bruno know that he can't find his father in the camp. He seems to have lost his father. And Bruno, wanting to make amends for getting his friend beaten, he agrees that he wants to come into the camp and help him find his father. As you do. So they make plans for Bruno to slip onto the fence. He gets a shovel and a second pair of striped pajamas, because, you know, that's what they wear. Or at least he thinks they're pajamas.
By the way, just to make this a little bit worse, they're just about to leave the family. They've decided that they live too close to the camp and the children aren't growing up well without any friends. So this is the morning that the children are going to leave the situation. So after this, everything will be better.
Yes, except Bruno slips onto the fence and he joins Shmuel and they go and look for Shmuel's father. Except at this point, Bruno still gives the impression he doesn't really understand the full gravity of the situation, because he still thinks that the camps they have cafeterias and, you know, they're well stocked and what have you, they have food. And this is important, because this really affects the emotional impact of the ending. And it just so happens that Bruno and Shmuel, they get gathered up together with a bunch of other prisoners from one particular tent, and just as Bruno's family realize he's missing, they're shepherded into a gas chamber, and they get gassed.
Now, the way this movie does this is the impressive part, because it doesn't just have, oh no, our child's missing, and then cut to the children in one of the huts, then they get herded out, then they get herded into the showers, and they're dead. That's it. No, it doesn't do that. It flicks between the scenes. So you'll have them in the hut, and then they're starting to get herded out. At this point, the mother and the daughter are running around the house. They can't find him. It's very odd. They're beginning to panic. Next, it cuts back. The children are being herded like animals across this open bit of ground towards the showers. The film switches back. At this point, they've realised that Bruno's climbed out the back of the house, and the father's got involved, and they've smashed down the door, and they're combing the forest.
Mm-hmm.
It switches back. The children are sitting in the changing rooms, crowded changing rooms with all these sick, ill-looking men, and it's just a sorrowful, sorrowful scene. It switches back again. Now they're running through the forest because the father has realised, or has a good inkling, that Bruno's gone to the farm, because that's all he's ever talked about is the farm.
Mm-hmm.
Cuts back again. They've all been instructed to take their clothes off, and they're all herded into the showers. And there's just one moment that it really was bad, was when, as they were being herded, people were starting to panic a little bit, and one man, who's just in the corner of the scene, he says, "Everyone calm down, it's just a shower, there's no need to panic." It wasn't even a big moment, it was just said in the background. You could barely hear it over the shouting. But just to hear that, and to see the children being shuffled in to this shower as that's being said, it just makes you want to curl up. Cut back again to the other scene. By this point, the father has pretty much reached the camp, and he's trying to run around the camp because he's seen that Bruno has dug underneath. Cut back again. The door is shut tight, the hole is opened in the roof, and the camera, pointing up this hole towards the sky sees a gas-masked Nazi pouring pellets onto the lens of the camera.
Yep.
That was hard to see that. And then the opening is shut tight. There's banging on the door, people shouting. The last scene as Bruno and Schmoll are standing side by side. They hold hands. They look terrified, surrounded by all these men. And by the time the father has gotten into the concentration camp, he's running around. He runs into the dormitory and sees that it's just been emptied. And he knows. The camera cuts back, and it's in the changing rooms.
We see all the uniforms which have been hung up on all the clothes pegs, and we see the closed gas chamber door, and the camera just slowly pulls away, fade to black.
In absolute silence. There's no banging, there's no music. It's to reinforce the fact that these men have been banging on the door to escape, and now just silence.
Well, you say silence, but over the credits there is actually a whole romantic, sappy-sounding score by James Horner, one of the world's least subtle composers.
Yeah. Well, it's silent for several moments of the movie as the camera fades to black, and the credits start to roll, and the music starts. But the very last scene is the mother breaking down at the fence as she's picked up her son's clothes, because remember, he's got changed at this point, and she just breaks down. And just on a side note, that was fantastic acting by, what was her name?
Vera Farmiga.
That's it. I mean, she has been a great actor all the way through, but that very last moment, that could have really have completely detracted from the moment. She really, really hit that nail home with just her screaming for her son.
And it's an extraordinarily well acted and extraordinarily well directed rendition of just about the worst ending they could have come up with.
Oh yeah, there is very little that you could do to this movie to make it worse or more sad.
I don't mean in terms of sad, I mean in terms of bad.
Wait, you mean this is a bad ending, or they could have made it a bad ending?
I mean, it is a bad ending. I mean, it's a poor ending. It's a shoddy ending.
Really? You didn't like the mother crying?
No, I mean, it's extraordinarily well made, but it's the wrong ending to the journey that the film was taking us on.
I suppose.
It's the wrong ending. Because, and I'll tell you why, I'll explain why, alright? Because the film's tagline when it was released was, it was innocence lost and humanity gained, or something to that effect. Yeah, that's what it is. A timeless story of innocence lost and humanity found. I'm looking at IMDb right now. It's not true. The ending gives lie to that. Because Bruno hasn't lost his innocence, he's just lost his life.
Well, that's true. That is true.
Because this is just it's a cynical and contrived sucker punch of an ending. One that's just saying, look, dead children, sad, be sad now. It doesn't have anything to do with the themes of dehumanization and indoctrination and, equality that have run through the film up to that point. It's just, all it's saying is, isn't it horrible and senseless this child died? Yes, it's horrible that this fictional child died, but, what about the other 6 million real ones?
Well, I think you're talking just about the ending here, aren't you, Andrew?
Yes, I am.
I agree with most of your points on that. I do feel that, though, the idea of innocence lost is not Bruno has lost his innocence. He is the characterization of innocence. He is innocence personified. And he dies, so he is innocence lost.
Essentially, his death is accidental. It could just as easily have been he fell down a well or got into a car accident. The Nazi regime that poisoned him was at the same time working to save his life. It was all just a big misunderstanding.
But this same ending, although I agree that it was a bit of a straightforward ending, you could kind of see it coming early on sort of ending. It does tie up a lot of the subplots of the movie. The idea that the father is determined to go through with this, even when his wife begs of him to stop doing this because she just can't stand the idea of killing these people, and he is steadfast to the end. He has worked hard for this career, and he will do what is asked of him, because as it is said in the movie, he is a soldier, and a soldier has to do what they are told. And this ending, although, again, like you said, he could have just fell down a well and died, this ending completes this little sub-arc of the father's character, as well as a few of the other characters, because it shows that, okay, this was one person who died. What about all the other Jews that died? Do they not matter in this story? Of course they matter, but it's the fact that Bruno died, and he is the son of the man in charge of this camp.
Yes, I get that.
Bruno's father would have never have felt the pain and the loss that all of these Jews felt if it wasn't for how this ended. This ending, it's a bit of a like, ooh, karma, karma's come back and got you sort of thing. And it is a bit too cheesy, really, at the ending. But it does complete the movie. In maybe not the most innovative way, but I think probably the most satisfying way.
Well, no, I would disagree. It's not satisfying at all. Because, well, okay, I agree with you with regard to the character of the father, because it does sort of highlight the hypocrisy, the idea that, do the Jews not weep for their children? And just sort of forces that realization upon them of, just the sheer cruelty of what he's doing. But at the same time, it also just makes Bruno the protagonist of the film, I remind you. It basically just makes him an object. It makes him this totem for the audience to just feel sad about. His journey doesn't matter. All the stuff he learns and all the stuff he sort of comes to realize over the course of the film is all rendered moot because he doesn't make any informed choice. His decision to go into the concentration camp at the end, to dig under the fence, is
innocence.
Based on misunderstanding, because he doesn't know what's going on. And if you don't trust your child characters to be able to make informed choices, why would you tell a story that focuses on the perspective of a child character?
Well, you enjoyed the Ender's Game, did you not, Andrew?
I did, yeah.
Can you not make the same argument about that?
Well, I suppose so. But, okay, you just pulled a fast one on me. I wasn't prepared for that.
Sorry, Andrew, but I know what you're getting at.
Ender's Game was more like showing the father character.
Mm-hmm.
In that Ender in that film is more analogous to the character of the father, where he's determined to go on at all costs, to push on at all costs, and then he just sort of is made to realize the ramifications of what he's doing. Because he's performing a simulation, and I'm going to be alienating anyone who's listening right now who hasn't seen Ender's Game.
Oh, by the way, second spoiler alert
for Ender's Game.
For the Ender's Game, because it's a great movie. You should go and see it. But what we're going to discuss now will spoil that movie.
Well, in that film, Ender, believing he is at that point performing a simulation, basically wipes out an entire alien race. And then upon discovering it was a simulation, completely breaks down because he realizes he has in fact committed genocide. That ending makes sense because that revelation does inform something. It makes him realize that his treatment of these aliens in simulation was essentially morally callous. But Bruno in this film, he doesn't get that. He never has that moment of revelation. His father does, but his father's not the main character. We don't have the father's perspective.
I believe, though that's just a personal impression, that moment at the very end, Bruno realizes. Although we never see it, and it's never shown in any way, you can take from this movie that as those men and those children are all scrushed together, and that stuff pours in from the roof, and everyone starts shouting and banging, they must know for their last moments what everything is. I
mean, I admit it's kind of impressive in the sense of, oh my god, they actually went there. They actually went through with this, and they actually killed off the two 8-year-old boys as the ending of this, this very glossy-looking family period drama. But basically what I'm saying is, the ending, powerful though it is as an emotional sucker punch, renders everything moot. It completely invalidates the whole story that came before it.
It does, but a lot of movies do that.
Such as?
I'll get back to you on that one, Andrew.
Okay, yeah, you do that, because I really can't think of anywhere else I've seen this. It's a really pretty extraordinarily bad bit of storytelling. And that really does pain me because there's so much in this movie that is to like, in my mind. There's so many bits of fairly acerbic and insightful criticism of the nature of dehumanization, of the nature of man's inhumanity to man, of war seen through the eyes of the innocent. And all that stuff does work, and then they undermine it all. And I don't understand the need to do that. Just think of the alternatives for how this movie could have ended. You know, Bruno could have lived, and he could have lived with the knowledge of what his father was complicit in. He could have lived with the knowledge of what he was living next to for all that time. And that, you know, would just leave him completely destroyed. That would complete the emotional arc. That would be the logical resolution to the film.
I agree with you, and that would be perhaps a more in-depth ending to the film, but that's unfortunately not how this film went. I mean, at no point in this film was it ever complex.
No, true.
It was just one very obvious sucker punch to the emotions after another. It was never subtle, and to be honest, I never expected the end to be subtle. In fact, I think if you tried to be too creative with the end, I feel like this movie may have lost something about it. It was a very straightforward movie, the very straightforward story, and a very straightforward ending. And if it started to dance around the ending, trying to put in weird, you know, oh, he got rescued at the last moment and now he's got to live with knowledge, it would be a great ending, but not for a movie of this level of complexity. It's just too much of a simple movie.
I don't think the word is simple. I think the word is exploitative, frankly.
Straightforward.
Exploitative.
Well, it is, but that's kind of what it was from start to finish. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. It is an exploitative movie. This movie was entirely designed to make you feel bad from the moment it started. You know, with the idea of the innocent scenes with the Nazi propaganda littered about, and you kind of think, oh, this is a quaint but very uncomfortable scene because it's lovely, but it is Nazi Germany, so I don't know how to feel. I mean, that's the very first scene and it already makes you feel uncomfortable.
That's just what I think, though, because in those first scenes, right up until about the last 20 minutes or so, the film does make you think, and then at the very end it just descends into pure emotional manipulation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's really unfortunate because there's a far better movie to be made out of this.
Do you think there'll be a sequel?
Somehow doubt it.
Fair enough. You remember we were talking about earlier? We talked about, you said, name me a movie that the main character is rendered mute.
Moot.
Sorry.
Not mute. That would be Old Boy. Yeah.
Well, I got this from Big Bang Theory during one of the episodes, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, yeah.
The idea, and this is basically, it's a great scene, by the way. Amy completely shoots Sheldon down, which doesn't happen very often, and it's just wonderful to see. Sheldon says it's one of his favourite movies, kind of, you know, can you find a fault with it? And Amy says yes. The main characters are completely mute to the whole movie. If they weren't there, the Nazis would have dug up the chest, they would have taken it to the island, and they still would have died. The main characters did nothing for the movie.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Although, I suppose the great virtue of Raiders of the Lost Ark is that it doesn't... Raiders of the Lost Ark is just a sort of a thrill ride, and it isn't really informed by its ending to the extent that this one is.
That's true. I mean, I know it's not much of a comparison between Raiders of the Lost Ark and this movie, but it's just, you know, when you said name me another movie where the characters are mute, this is another movie where the characters are mute. And there probably are other ones out there, but I don't know that many movies.
Yeah. So, in sum, would I recommend you to watch it? You know, I actually think it might be worth a look as long as you're aware of the ending in advance, almost. If you know what's coming, and you know how much it undermines itself, there is something to be gained from this if you just sort of expunge those last 20 minutes.
I'm very conflicted on whether I would recommend this movie. If you've never seen this movie, you don't know what it's about, or you don't know the ending, I wouldn't recommend it, because it's a sad movie, and when you finish it, you'll feel worse than you've probably felt all day. And what's the point of watching a movie that's just going to ruin your night?
Pretty much.
Personally, for me, I don't watch a movie to make myself feel like shit for the rest of the night. And for days later, I felt like hell for at least a day or two after this, just thinking about it, just going over that last scene again and again in my head, just trying to get it out of my head. But that sort of stuff just doesn't leave you in a hurry. And I thought, would anybody want to go through that? On the other side of that coin, if you've read the story, if you've read the book, and you know how it ends, I would say, okay, if you want to watch the movie, then yeah, I would recommend it. It's a good story, and it's a nice, complete whole package of a story. But then on that argument, if you've read the book, would you want to watch the movie? Because the book's probably going to make you feel like ass. And then you're going to watch the movie to make you feel like ass. So in either direction, whether you know how this movie ends or you don't know how this movie ends, it's going to make you feel bad either way.
Pretty much. Because, man, after this, it's like, I was just sort of left looking at the screen like, huh? What did I just watch? What the hell just happened?
I just swore at the computer.
Yeah, you swore at me over Facebook.
Yeah, that's true. I was so angry at the end of this. Not for any particular reason. It was just such a sad downer of a movie. It just brings you down like a lead brick that it just made me angry. Mainly because the child was so stupid. Realised your basic surroundings. You've seen one man, which you know is Jewish, get beat to death. Okay, you never saw it, but he was just round the corner, and there's blood everywhere, and he never comes back. You know the Jewish man just got beat to death. You are being told constantly by these teachings that Jewish people are bad. You find out that your friend is a Jewish boy who lives in a camp.
Yep.
Put one and one together. Realize what's going on. Like I said, when I was 8, I didn't have any general understanding of my surroundings in a political sense. But I could probably have worked that out as an 8-year-old. I think a 6-year-old could have probably worked that one out.
I think he was 9 in the book. That's even worse.
Ridiculous. And just to finish off, Andrew, before we wrap this one up, I mentioned earlier, and I just would like to hear your opinion on this, would you agree that things would have turned out better for Bruno if he had embraced Nazism and become an indoctrinated person?
Well, that's the thing, because he never really has any agency in that. He doesn't get to make that decision because he doesn't understand it. He doesn't know what the implications are one way or the other. And he just feels like he's being keel-hauled through the whole film.
He does seem a little out of place throughout the whole movie. Like, every other character seems to have some sort of opinion on Nazism, but he just doesn't.
Bruno doesn't get a say. He doesn't get to decide his fate, and that's really what sinks the whole film.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think the ending was well done, and I wouldn't have liked to have seen the ending done any other way, because I feel like it would have been a bit of a cop-out in terms of the ending. I didn't like the ending. I didn't like the movie, but in terms of the directions it went, that's exactly what I expected, and I got what I expected, and I thought it was all portrayed very well.
And it was well made, I have to give it that. So, I guess if I had to sum it up, I'd say watch it or don't, but if you do, just draw your own conclusions, because this is a divisive one, and it's one you sort of have to go in with an open mind.
Yeah, and don't watch it if you're even feeling a little bit down.
Yeah.
Because if you're feeling a bit miserable, this movie will just ruin you.
Yeah. So anyway.
I think that's us for tonight. Andrew, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Only that next week we're watching a much more cheerful film. A Rob Zombie horror film.
Fair enough.
So that's going to be fun. That's going to be a change of pace.
That's going to be... It can't be any more depressing, let's be honest, Andrew.
Let's be honest, yeah, no.
So, if that's all from you, Andrew?
That's all from me here, Daniel.
I think that is a good night from the two of us, and I hope you have a pleasant night.
You guys, I know we won't. We just watched The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas.
Oh, what a movie. Bye.
Good night, all.